In a single night, a young leader changed the rules of global power. Drones soared silently, a key facility erupted in flames, and the world watched in disbelief. No one expected it. No one was ready. Who is Traoré? Why did he risk everything? And what does his strike mean for the West? The answers will shock you. For decades, Burkina Faso had been caught in the crosshairs of global power struggles. Everything changed in a heartbeat. Traoré's drone strike exploded across global headlines, leaving the world reeling. It wasn't just another piece of breaking news. It wasn't just another headline about conflict in a faraway region. No, this was different. This was the kind of moment that stops time, the kind of event that makes the world's most powerful nations sit up, and the kind of headline that makes everyday people ask, what just happened? Imagine the scene. In one corner of the world, life was moving as usual, people scrolling their phones, sipping morning coffee, or rushing to work. And then, suddenly, every news app, every social feed, every TV broadcast flashed the same words: drone strike. Traoré. Shock waves. The sound bites were urgent, the footage looping endlessly, a whirring swarm of drones, the flash of impact, the rising plumes of smoke. For many, it felt surreal. Did that really happen? People asked, refreshing their screens again, waiting for confirmation. Within minutes, hashtags started trending globally. West Traoré strike, West drone war, global shock. On Twitter, X, TikTok, and every platform in between, millions of voices chimed in with theories, outrage, or pure disbelief. Memes, shaky footage, and expert analysis mixed into a digital storm of chaos. But while social media was buzzing, world leaders were scrambling. Phones rang in Washington, Paris, London, and beyond. Emergency meetings were called at lightning speed. Advisors rushed into rooms with files under their arms, whispering to presidents and prime ministers, "This changes everything. Because here's the truth. This wasn't just a strike. This was a message. And everyone from the White House to the Kremlin was trying to decode it. Was this a declaration of defiance, a warning, or the first move in something bigger? For ordinary people, though, the immediate feeling was fear. Parents glanced at their children, wondering what kind of world they were growing up in. College students in Europe texted their friends, "Could this mean war?" Traders on Wall Street looked nervously at the numbers on their screens as markets jolted. In Africa, Asia, and the Middle East, citizens debated whether this was justice, rebellion, or just madness. And here's what made it even more unsettling. Traoré hadn't fired missiles from a billion-dollar jet or from a hidden submarine in the ocean. No. He had used drones, small, agile, silent machines. Technology that once seemed futuristic was now in the hands of someone willing to use it in ways the world had never seen before. That realization alone shook the foundations of global security. If one leader with limited resources could deliver a strike so shocking, what did that mean for tomorrow? The strike hit the airwaves so fast that it was compared to other historic shocks, moments like 9/11, Pearl Harbor, or the Yabe first use of nuclear weapons, not because the scale was the same, but because the symbolism was. It was a rupture in the global order, a reminder that power is shifting, that the old rules no longer guarantee safety. Even news anchors, normally calm and collected, struggled to find the right words. Some spoke in hushed tones, others with rising anger. "This changes the game," one analyst said live on CNN. "This is a signal the West cannot ignore." On Al Jazeera, the framing was different. For years, voices from the global South were dismissed. Now one of those voices has been heard in the loudest way possible. Meanwhile, the streets told their own story. In Ouagadougou, young people celebrated in front of screens, chanting Traoré's name. In Paris, crowds gathered in protest, demanding their government respond. In Washington, security was visibly tightened. From celebrations to condemnations, the world was split. But nobody, absolutely nobody, could remain indifferent. The shockwaves weren't only emotional, they were economic too. Oil prices spiked within hours, investors pulled money from risky markets, and airlines rerouted flights away from regions suddenly seen as unstable. Within just one day, billions of dollars had shifted hands, and that was before anyone fully understood the scale of the damage. But the most powerful impact was psychological. The West, long accustomed to being the side with the strongest military edge, suddenly felt vulnerable. If drones could slip past defense systems once, what would stop them from doing it again? That chilling thought echoed not only in government offices, but also in the homes of ordinary people watching from thousands of miles away. And as the smoke cleared from the strike site, and as footage replayed across the globe, one question kept resurfacing. Why did he do it? People wanted answers. But before answers could come, the first lesson was already clear. The world was not the same anymore. What Traoré unleashed wasn't just a strike, it was a signal flare to the entire planet. A sign that technology had democratized power, that anger had found a new weapon, and that even the mightiest nations could be caught off guard. The shock wasn't just in the explosion, it was in the realization that the balance of power itself had shifted, even if just slightly, forever. And that's why the world froze, why leaders panicked, why ordinary people whispered about the start of something new. Traoré's drone strike wasn't just a headline. It was a turning point. A crack in the wall of the old order, and the beginning of a conversation no one could avoid anymore. Who is Traoré? That's the question millions asked the moment his name flashed across their screens. Until now, he wasn't a household name outside Africa. But in his own region, Ibrahim Traoré was already a symbol. A man who rose from the ranks of the military to the presidency of Burkina Faso in 2022 at just 34 years old, the youngest leader in the world. For many in Africa, he was not just a leader. He was a sign of defiance, someone who openly challenged the West and rejected the old colonial order. His speeches often carried one theme: Africa must stand on its own feet. And when he spoke those words, he wasn't addressing just Burkina Faso. He was speaking to the entire continent. But let's rewind for a moment. Who really is Traoré, and what brought him to the point of launching a drone strike that would shock the globe? Born in 1988 in the Haut-Bassin region of Burkina Faso, Traoré joined the military as a young man, studying not just strategy, but also history, and particularly the history of Africa's long entanglement with Europe. His worldview was shaped by decades of seeing how former colonial powers still influenced African politics, economies, and militaries. He fought in Mali against extremist groups, earning respect as a soldier who didn't back down under pressure. By the time he seized power in 2022, Burkina Faso was in turmoil. Terrorist attacks plagued villages, foreign forces operated on its soil, and the people were losing hope. Traoré stepped in with a bold promise. Burkina Faso would reclaim its dignity, its independence, and its security. For his supporters, he became a hero. For his critics, he was a risky populist. But one thing was undeniable. Traoré spoke with conviction. Unlike many leaders who measured their words to please foreign powers, he spoke bluntly. He accused France and other Western nations of exploiting Africa, and he demanded respect on equal terms. In his fiery speeches, he didn't mince words. We cannot be slaves in our own lands. This defiance wasn't just rhetoric, it translated into action. He expelled French troops, strengthened ties with Russia, and called for a Pan-African unity against what he described as neo-colonial control. In a world where most leaders bow to pressure, Traoré stood tall. That made him admired by some, but also feared by others. Now, why drones? Why this method of striking? That's where Traoré showed a different kind of thinking. Instead of relying on traditional tanks, jets, or weapons supplied by foreign powers, he embraced modern, low-cost, high-impact technology. Drones are the great equalizer in today's conflicts. They don't require billion-dollar budgets. They don't need massive armies. They simply need precision, creativity, and determination. For Traoré, drones represented more than weapons. They were a symbol that Africa could wield modern technology on its own terms. When he decided to launch that strike, he wasn't just thinking about destruction. He was thinking about psychology, about shocking the world into realizing that even a so-called small nation could shake the system. And the choice worked. Overnight, Traoré's name was trending worldwide. To his supporters across Africa, he was David taking a swing at Goliath. To the West, he was a dangerous disruptor willing to break the rules of the international order. But whichever side you stood on, one fact was clear. The young leader had forced the world to look at him. The question now became, what did he want the world to see? Was he simply lashing out, or was this a calculated move in a bigger game? Traoré's history suggests it's the latter. He's not reckless. He's deliberate. Every action he takes is framed around his vision of African independence. And the drone strike, as shocking as it was, fit that vision perfectly. In a single moment, he went from being a regional figure to a global headline. From a man often dismissed in Western capitals to a leader impossible to ignore. And that's why people everywhere asked, who is this man? Because now, Traoré wasn't just a soldier, a president, or a nationalist. He was a symbol of resistance, of rebellion, of a new era where even the smallest nation could make the biggest noise. The strike wasn't random. Traoré didn't simply launch drones into the sky without purpose. Every move was calculated, every target chosen with intent. That's what made this moment so shocking. It wasn't chaos, it was strategy. So where exactly did the drones hit? Reports quickly confirmed the strike was aimed at a facility tied to Western influence in Africa, a location symbolizing power, control, and presence. Some described it as a military installation. Others claimed it was an energy hub, a vital link in the chain of resources connecting Africa to Europe. Either way, it wasn't about bricks and steel, it was about what that target represented. Think about it. Hitting a battlefield outpost would have been one thing. Striking an empty desert would have been another. But Traoré aimed at something bigger. A nerve center. A place that sent a message beyond the immediate blast zone. In military terms, the damage was significant, but in psychological terms, it was seismic. The question burning on everyone's mind was simple. Why this target? The answer lies in symbolism. For decades, Africa has been viewed by the West as a supplier of raw materials. Gold, uranium, oil, cotton. And in Burkina Faso, that history cuts deep. For years, foreign companies extracted resources while local communities lived in poverty. To Traoré and many of his supporters, the facility that was struck wasn't just infrastructure. It was a reminder of exploitation. By hitting it, he was saying, we will not be controlled anymore. But there was more to it. The strike wasn't only about challenging the West, it was also about proving a point to his own people. Traoré has been telling the citizens of Burkina Faso that their nation will rise, that they will no longer bow to outsiders. By targeting such a visible symbol, he reinforced that message in the most dramatic way possible. To his supporters, the explosion was a roar of defiance. Now let's step into the bigger picture. Why was the West so rattled by this strike? Because it exposed to vulnerability. For years, Western powers assumed that their military presence abroad was untouchable, shielded by advanced technology and overwhelming resources. But one night, drones, small, cheap, bypassed those defenses and struck. The unthinkable had happened, and suddenly, every general, every defense minister was asking, if this can happen here, where else can it happen? The choice of target also raised fears of escalation. If Traoré could hit once, could he hit again? Would energy pipelines, embassies, or other installations be next? This wasn't about the physical damage caused that day. It was about the uncertainty it unleashed for tomorrow. And here's the twist. By not aiming at civilians, Traoré walked an exceptionally fine line. The strike was military, not terroristic. It wasn't meant to massacre ordinary people. It was meant to send a message to governments. That distinction, while controversial, is important. It made the act shocking, but also political. Traoré wanted the West to hear him, not just fear him. The reaction proved his calculation was correct. Overnight, world leaders convened emergency sessions. The UN debated resolutions. NATO issued statements. Economists warned of ripple effects. The target may have been a single facility, but the echo was global. For the people of Burkina Faso, this moment was portrayed as a victory. Crowds gathered in the streets, waving flags, chanting slogans, celebrating what they saw as a blow against decades of domination. Whether you agreed with them or not, one thing was clear. The strike ignited pride, anger, and a sense of empowerment across the region. And for the West, it was a rude awakening. Suddenly, their dominance didn't feel so secure. Suddenly, their systems looked vulnerable. Suddenly, the idea that one small nation could challenge them didn't seem so far-fetched. So let's ask again. Why this target? Why now? Because Traoré wanted to strike at the heart of Western influence. He wanted to show the world that Africa wasn't powerless, that a new generation of leaders was ready to break the chains. By choosing a facility tied to energy or military control, he didn't just destroy walls and machines. He shattered the illusion of untouchability. The blast was more than fire and smoke. It was a statement. A carefully chosen, carefully executed statement that echoed far louder than the sound of the explosion itself. And as the dust settled, one thing became clear. This wasn't just about Burkina Faso anymore. It was about the balance of power, the vulnerability of empires, and the reminder that even the mightiest can be caught off guard when they least expect it. The moment Traoré's drones struck, the world didn't just watch, it trembled. The ripples of that single act spread like shockwaves through governments, markets, and even ordinary conversations at dinner tables thousands of miles away. First came the immediate reactions. News anchors spoke in rapid voices, breaking updates rolling in every few minutes. In Washington, the Pentagon scrambled to assess what had just happened. In Paris, the French government, long tied to West Africa, called emergency meetings through the night. In Brussels, EU officials drafted statements even before they fully understood the damage. Words like provocation, reckless act, and historic escalation filled the headlines. But here's the interesting thing. Not everyone used the same language. While Western governments condemned the strike as dangerous and destabilizing, many voices across Africa framed it differently. Social media lit up with hashtags celebrating the event, painting Traoré as a hero who dared to challenge the powerful. Memes showed David slinging his stone at Goliath with captions like, "Africa has spoken." For some, the drones weren't just weapons, they were symbols of dignity restored. The markets reacted just as fast as the media. Oil prices spiked within hours. Investors pulled billions from African markets, fearing instability. The ripple touched Asia and America too, as stocks dipped in energy and defense sectors. Airlines rerouted flights, insurers raised premiums, and suddenly, an event in Burkina Faso was being felt in boardrooms in London and New York. That's the nature of today's interconnected world. One strike in one corner can rattle the entire system. And then came the security response. Western nations quickly raised alerts at embassies and bases across Africa. Military analysts went live on television, pointing to maps, explaining how drones had slipped past defenses, and warning that this was only the beginning. In private, generals worried. If Traoré could do this once, what would stop others from copying his playbook? What if groups across the globe realized the same thing? That small, agile drone fleets could bypass billion-dollar defense systems. The fear wasn't about what had happened. It was about what might happen next. At the United Nations, chaos reigned. Some nations demanded a swift response, warning that Traoré's actions set a dangerous precedent. Others urged restraint, arguing that this was about deeper grievances, decades of exploitation, decades of being ignored. Heated debates raged in New York, and for once Africa wasn't on the sidelines. Burkina Faso and its allies had the world's attention, and they weren't backing down. Meanwhile, the public reaction told its own story. In Ouagadougou, thousands filled the streets, waving flags and cheering Traoré's name. They saw the strike as a victory, not just for Burkina Faso, but for Africa. In Paris, protests broke out too, but with the opposite tone. Angry citizens demanded answers from their government. How could this happen? What does it mean for us? On social media, the divide was clear. Western users flooded timelines with fear and anger. This is terrorism, some wrote. Others demanded retaliation. The West must respond with strength. But African voices pushed back. You call it terror. We call it freedom. The debate wasn't just military, it was moral. Whose perspective defined the narrative? Even within Western governments, cracks appeared. Some leaders wanted an immediate military response to teach Traoré a lesson. But others warned that rushing into escalation could backfire. What if a strike against Burkina Faso united the region against the West? What if it turned Traoré from a local leader into a continental martyr? These questions weighed heavily, and for once the West looked uncertain. And while the politicians argued, everyday people felt the tension. Parents asked if this could mean a new war. Young people debated whether Africa was entering a new era of independence or simply walking into more chaos. Traders worried about the economy, while soldiers worried about the next strike. The most profound ripple, though, was psychological. For decades, the world had believed in the security of Western dominance, but the drones proved that dominance was fragile. It showed that even the mightiest could be touched, that even the smallest could make their mark. That realization shook not just governments, but the entire global imagination. By the end of the week, the ripple had spread everywhere, in headlines, in hashtags, in hushed conversations. Traoré's strike wasn't just an act of war. It was a shock to the system. A reminder that the rules of power are changing, and that no fortress is truly unbreakable, and the most dangerous ripple of all, inspiration. Leaders, movements, and militias around the world were watching closely. If Traoré could shock the West, why couldn't they? If drones could tilt the balance once, why not again? That thought, lingering, unspoken, yet very real, was the ripple that truly kept world leaders awake at night. So, what was the message? What was Traoré really trying to say when he launched a drone strike that shocked the entire planet? To some, the meaning was clear. This was defiance. A bold statement to the West that Africa would no longer bow its head, no longer allow itself to be dictated to. For decades, Western powers have maintained influence in the Sahel through military presence, economic leverage, and political pressure. By sending drones into the skies, Traoré sent his own pressure back, not with speeches, but with action. His message was simple. You are not untouchable. We can strike back. But there's another layer. Traoré wasn't only speaking to the West, he was also speaking to Africa. For his people in Burkina Faso, and for millions across the continent, the strike was a symbol of empowerment. It said, we are not weak. We can stand up. We can fight on equal terms, even against the most powerful. This wasn't just politics. It was psychology. And in a region where so many feel overlooked or dominated, that psychology matters. Still, the message to the West cut the deepest. For decades, the assumption in Washington, Paris, and Brussels was that control was secure, that African nations would never dare to push too hard. The strike shattered that illusion. It forced Western leaders to ask questions they hadn't asked in years. What if our influence is slipping? What if these leaders aren't bluffing anymore? What if the rules of the game are changing? And that was the point all along. By launching the strike, Traoré didn't just make noise, he forced the world to pay attention. Whether you admired him or despised him, you could no longer ignore him. And for a leader who had long accused the West of silence and neglect, that attention was a victory. But what about the future? That's where the story gets complicated, because one strike is not the end, it's the beginning. The first possibility is escalation. If Western powers decide to retaliate militarily, Burkina Faso could be dragged into a wider conflict. That might unite parts of Africa against the West, but it could also bring devastation to Traoré's people. The risk of war hangs over every discussion, and that risk is real. The second possibility is deterrence. Some analysts believe Traoré wanted to prove a point, to show strength and then pause. In this scenario, the strike was not about starting a war, but about drawing a line. It was his way of saying, respect us, or this will not be the last time. If that's the case, then the next move is up to the West. Will they meet him with diplomacy, or will they test his resolve? The third possibility is inspiration. Already, leaders and movements across the world are watching closely. If drones could shake the system in Burkina Faso, what about in other regions? Could this spark a wave of similar acts, where smaller nations or groups challenge the dominance of larger powers? If that happens, then Traoré's strike won't just be remembered as a single event. It will be remembered as the spark that lit a global fire. And beyond strategy and geopolitics, there's a moral question. Was this right or wrong? To the West, it was reckless, destabilizing, and unacceptable. To many Africans, it was justice, long overdue. But morality, like power, depends on perspective. And that's why this story is so powerful, because it forces us to confront those perspectives. So what's next? That depends on the choices made in the days and weeks ahead. If Western powers choose confrontation, we may see escalation. If they choose dialogue, we may see a shift, a chance to address grievances that have been ignored for far too long. And if they choose silence, well, then the silence itself might be an answer, one that invites even bolder actions in the future. One thing is certain, the strike cannot be undone. The message cannot be unheard. The balance of power, even if only slightly, has been shaken. And now, the world stands at a crossroads. Traoré's drone strike was not just an explosion. It was a challenge to the West's dominance, to Africa's silence, to the global order itself. And the question that lingers, the question every leader and every citizen must ask, is this: will we treat this as a flashpoint to escalate, or a turning point to change? The drone strike by Ibrahim Traoré was more than a military maneuver. It was a statement, a spark, and even a turning point. Whether history remembers him as reckless or revolutionary will depend on what comes next, on how the world responds, and on how Africa redefines its place in that world. That is the legacy of the strike. Not just the damage it caused, but the conversations it sparked. Not just the fear it spread, but the possibilities it revealed. And that's where the story leaves us. Not with answers, but with questions. Questions about power, justice, technology, and the future of global relations. Questions that only time will answer. What do you think? Was this the birth of a new era for Africa, or the start of a dangerous spiral? Was Traoré reckless, or was he revolutionary? Was the strike an act of madness, or an act of courage? Drop your thoughts in the comments below, because this conversation isn't ending anytime soon, and if you want more deep dives into African politics, hidden histories, and the power struggles reshaping our world, make sure to hit subscribe, tap the bell icon, and join us here on Sahel Narrative, because this is only the beginning.